Welcome to Too Much Music,
a show where two music know-it-alls talk about making music in a world
that probably already has a little too much music in it.
Allow me to introduce Alison. She's an indie hero who's written thousands of songs and can rock a pedal board like nobody's business.
But I also have graduate degrees in music theory and know quite a bit about how the brain processes music. And this here is Greg. He's a legitimate conservatory-trained doctor of music who can conceive of musical sounds that we mere mortals can't even comprehend.
Okay, yeah, but I'm also an old-school 80s goth, and I'm currently living on the road and producing music out of a studio that I built in my RV.
We used to be married.
But now, we just have this podcast.
Welcome, everyone. This is episode 4 of the Too Much Music podcast, and we could not be more pleased to be here with you for part 2 of our two-parter on musical challenges that Greg and I have given to each other to try to sort of, improve on things that we may not be the best at in music and in life.
Yep, we're trying to dig deeper into our creative process, open it up, make it public, because that's what you do nowadays. And but ultimately, Alison and I, my strengths are her weaknesses. Her strengths are absolutely my weaknesses. And because of that, we work incredibly well together. Not as a married couple anymore, but we in every other way. And so we can constructively push each other to overcome the issues that we see and that we feel in our own process.
Yeah, so last episode, we talked about a challenge that I gave to Greg, which was essentially, allowing him to use his amazing skills at improvisation and playing the piano that he often doesn't use in his compositional process. And that went super well. So this episode, we're going to talk about a challenge Greg gave to me, which
Excellent.
is really...
Let's take a look at Alison's issues. Let's start with, tell me about your mother. No,
we're gonna be here for a while.
Okay.
No, so I think if Greg's issue that we looked at was that he plans too much, one of my problems as a musician is that I plan too little. I'm a very intuitive musician. I really just hit it and go, and often that's where I start from. I start from that.
Yeah, you've got the guitar sitting right behind you. You've got sensory. I mean, you're just ready to scratch pad it. You're ready to just lay it down.
Just the inspiration. It's just pouring into and out of me. But really, I really am an extremely intuitive musician and person. And that's all well and good. And obviously I don't want to, and I'm not in danger of losing that. However, you do miss out on some pretty interesting stuff when you don't plan and when you don't sort of think ahead. So I'm at a really great point right now where I have made, 2 albums of material that were kind of my getting back into music after a long break albums. I love them. I'm not dissing them. But they really were me, kind of finding my footing again as a musician after several years of not playing music at all. And now I find myself having an abundance of material for a new project, which I'm very excited about, and I'm really getting started on it in earnest. And I'd like to take a step back and sort of plan it a little bit more.
Well, so let me react to some of your early music a little bit, and we'll hopefully get to listen to some. But it's fair to say, I think that it's eclectic, right? So for you being so intuitive, so immediate in your previous process, it's like you're in a store with everything that's available and you're just grabbing whatever you want off the shelf and you can drop it in and you go, and it hits you a certain way and you react, right? And so you end up with what might be a pretty unusual collage of sounds and styles and things, right? That make it very hard to take on the road, but also it's hard for a listener maybe to get their bearings and say, oh, this is what she does, or this is what she sounds like.
Yeah, that's been hard for me, my whole musical career. So just stepping back even to before these recent solo albums that I've done, throughout my 20s, I had a band called Voodoo Economics, and it was a 3-piece band, and it was just so fun. And
I think I've heard of them before. Voodoo Economics.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Genius of the name. Something, DOO, Economics. Anywho, Voodoo
Thank you.
was a three-piece, and it was me playing everything under the sun that I had at my disposal. But then I had
Whatever you found on the street.
yeah, pretty much like whatever I got in bulk from some guy's attic on Craigslist, and literally. And then, but I had a great bass player and drummer that were very tight and were, very consistent in the way that they played. And that sort of brought the room together. So I was able to be a little bit of a, crazy person. And that kind of worked. I still had, we still had the same problems that I have had recently with my solo work in that, people definitely were sometimes confused by how different songs sounded. There was not a lot of consistency in the sound of the band in a lot of people's minds.
Okay. And to be clear, your role was you were the creative leader, I guess, writing most. Is that fair? I mean, you were essentially pushing
there was the bass player, Jeremy Prouty, also, took a lot of the lead, especially later on. But I would say if you had to pick one person, it was probably me. Yep.
You were the primary songwriter, primary leader. And so when you handed over bass and drum duties to your bandmates, they brought a lot to what they were doing, but you didn't think about it so much. You didn't get involved in, you weren't pulling a Frank Zappa, giving your drummer Justin a score to follow, right? No, he got to do what he wanted, and that was his contribution to the creative process, but you didn't have to think about too much about what the drums were going to do, right?
Yes, and drums especially are the topic of conversation here today. And so, as a drummer, Justin was very self-sufficient. He had his style. He's and always has been very into electronic music and techno, minimal techno, stuff like that. So he took those styles and his own style of drumming and, kind of created his own thing. It incorporated both his acoustic drum set, which he's a very good drummer. And then he would often pull in electronic drums too. Like he had an octapad that he would hook up to various sounds. And this was in the early 2000s. So we had a mixture of electronic drums with acoustic drums. And so that was kind of what I came up with as I was, growing as a songwriter and growing as a person who was recording music, was that mixture of electronic and acoustic drums. So when I started, cut 8 years later, when I started working on music again and doing solo stuff, I think I naturally gravitated toward imitating, to some extent, the Voodoo Economics sound. And so I was pulling in, as a non-drummer myself, I play keyboard instruments and guitars. I don't hit things. So as a non-drummer, I was pulling in, acoustic drum sets. There are so many amazing, sample-based instruments now. Like you can make a great drum sound, a great acoustic drum sound without having a drummer in the room. So that's what I was doing. And I was combining those with different like drum machine sounds to basically craft for each track the sound that I thought at the time would be good. And that basically meant I would go with my gut at the beginning of the process, and that's where I was, and that's what I had to work with for drums.
Okay. Now, I mixed your first EP and I don't know, about half of this second, more recent EP. So I was very involved in that process, I suppose, on after the post-creative side. Okay. What I can say about some of those tracks for sure as the mixing engineer is that you used a lot of drums and you used a lot of drum kits, and you'd be like, hey, that bass drum isn't right. Let me throw 3 more on and make sure that I get the oomph or the crack or whatever I need in the So okay. My point being that
it was amateur hour.
Go ahead.
It was amateur hour.
Well,
I'll admit it.
Okay.
I'm ashamed.
No, but what I'm saying is you were searching for a sound though. Was that fair? Or you were a drum sound, we'll say.
No, I wasn't searching. No? I mean, I was just enjoying what I was hearing. I think in this way I was like a little child just wandering through the forest. Which actually brings me to my next point, which is that we need to take a break. We now have sponsors for this show. We're gonna do. Yeah.
Gosh, they are so good to us.
I know.
And important
really
to the lifeblood of what we do. We want to bring more content. We need more sponsors. Let's do it. Let's take a break. Hear from our sponsor. pork and beans and a fresh green salad, a raw green salad. Gotta eat right, you know. Chicken meat and a crisp green salad, a mean green salad is the healthy way to go.
So a huge, huge thank you to our sponsor. We couldn't do it without them, and I hope you support
absolutely
the great things that they do. Amazing.
Makes our lives better every day.
So back to drums. Yeah, so essentially what I was finding, and again, I like the end product that came out of those, sort of sporadic drum processing sessions, but I wanted for the new material to have a bit more of a unified approach. And so that's where Greg's challenge to me came from. I was talking to him about that.
Maybe I can explain the story a bit, because Alison comes to me and she's saying, "Well, I'm thinking about this. This drum machine, this sound. And I've heard a lot of the new material that's coming. Boy, it's the best. I think it's the best music you've ever made, and it's consistently at this super high level. Anyway, I think it's fantastic. Okay, sure I do, but I do. And the question becomes, well, geez, how do you want to use percussion? When I was mixing your original EP, sometimes I would think, these drums need to be massive, they need to be huge, and you'd say, no, they need to live. They're doing a lot, but they need to live in the back, And so it was confusing to me what role drums in percussion, what hitting stuff, what role that would play in some of your songs. Your songs are so good, and they do so much. You can sit and play your songs on a guitar and sing them, and we get it. Like, it's there. It's more interesting and more fun when there's all the world of everything you do now with the orchestration and such. But my point is, there's a lot of questions about what kind of an effect various drum sounds will have on the world that you're creating. And they can have a massive impact, right? You can reference all sorts of styles, not just hip hop versus rock. There's so much subtlety that goes into this.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that the power that drums have is that as soon as you hear a drum sound come in a track that you're listening to, it provides a lot of the reptilian feeling that you're getting from that track. Somehow it creates the world. I would say almost more if there are drums there, or even their absence. If they're not there at all, that changes things drastically too. I mean, they just have this power that no other instrument has to craft create the bed of the sonic world. And so,
certainly for songs, songwriting, certainly.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I would say even in classical music, this is true. Percussion, plays this role that's really interesting, especially, of course, after from the 20th century on.
Historically, percussion was a military, was something that you used in the military to keep people walking in step. I mean, and so it only showed up in music. Honestly, it only showed up in music really when you were trying to recall a parade or some kind of official government or military feeling, right? So it had a very specific meaning to the audience of the day,
and that changed in the late 19th century, right? And into the 20th. How so? Well, I mean I'm saying in orchestral music, especially. Mm-hmm. When did drums start to become? When did percussion start to become?
We're glossing over obviously so much detail that's so important. I mean, because the timpani brass hits, in a Haydn symphony or something, they have a very different role. I'm talking specifically about like a percussion section doing anything. But anyway, in the certainly, let's just skip ahead for ease of use to the early mid 20th century. Okay, where percussion comes into its own. There's even the first piece written for solo percussion that has no other instruments in it. In the sense that percussion and the percussion family now is a wide, diverse range of color. Just so much. I mean, it almost in a way beats out in terms of frequency response compared to the orchestra. It can do more on all. It can be louder, it can be higher, it can be lower. I mean, it's just phenomenally powerful to the orchestra and to the colors you get.
Well, and actually maybe it's not magic after all. Maybe it's simple physics. I mean, I really do think that's the same thing that happens, in pop music with drums, that you get this extremely punchy wide range, these transients that absolutely destroy everything else that's happening. It just couldn't be more, it couldn't be more in your face. And maybe it's just because of that in a way. And of course, also the actual rhythms at play create things like, how you want to move your body to it, right? Which is super important in all non-classical music.
Electronic instruments really took this to another place, especially, let's say, even in the 80s. Yeah. And what I specifically mean is that when you have a rock drummer keeping time and doing the thing that they do, which, lots of cymbal crashes or whatever in heavy metal, that's because the stochastic random noise element of those cymbals is emphasizing the distorted guitar sound. I mean, anyway, there's lots of practical reasons why all that happens. Okay. But in, let's say, in the 80s with electronic music production and groups like Depeche Mode, they now had very pared down percussion tracks that are complicated, and they're actually hocketed. Like the rhythms are very tightly constructed using samples of things that may or may not have started life as a drum, right? And they're all having an interplay that become as important as the melodic hooks, the rhythmic hooks, right? And then we have the dance clubs that, anyway, so
that's where I really wanted to go with my drums on my new material. So I wanted to take more of that 80s approach to, which is pretty popular now, to drums, in that I think I want to, to eliminate, for the most part, with maybe some percussion exceptions, to eliminate acoustic drums and really focus on, drum machine sounds, electronic drum sounds. I find myself liking that these days a lot, and really wanting to, just wanting to tighten it up and sort of do that. So,
so Alison comes to me and says, I'm working on all these new tracks. I've heard many of the demos and whatnot. And she says, I'm thinking about this drum solution, that drum solution, etc. What do you think? Or what, where should I go? And I said, here's what you need to do. And this became the challenge. I said, what you need to do is to take a track that you're working on that has a heavy drum passage or something that you're going to use. And I want you to take 4 classic, iconic drum sounds, which you can get easily through samples and virtual instruments and things. They don't have to be perfect. The idea here is grab an 808 and grab a CR78, sort of kit, grab an acoustic kit, whatever. You're going to tell us what you did in the challenge, but I said, just whatever they are, make them different drum worlds and present, or quickly do a rough mix of the same musical passage in your song with these 4 different drum approaches. And let's just react to them and talk about it and see what we think.
Yeah, so I did exactly that. And I think now we're going to play that for you. And on the YouTube video, I'll put up the actual drum machines that I used on the screen. But for the audio only folks, this will be about a minute of music, and each 4 measures will have a change in drums, so it'll be very quick. The first one is a 707 style drum machine, but from an emulator 2 emulation. And so the emulator 2...
12-bit.
Yeah. I think it was 8-bit. I think the emulator 2 was an 8-bit synth.
Okay, so the 707 was not 8-bit, but
this is an Arturia instrument, right? So it's all levels. You can
do whatever you want.
Yeah, all levels of drum meta. But anyway, it's a kind of a dirty and very 80s sounding drum sound. Then next we're gonna have a pretty fair 606 emulation from Native Instruments Battery, an 808 from a really great library that I've used a lot called Sonic Couture Electroacoustic.
Links of these libraries will, by the way, be in the description. No, they won't be in the description.
No, we're not going to link to them.
No.
And then number 4, the fourth 4 measures is a CR78, which is something from the Arturia Spark plugin. Something that I've always loved, the CR78, and I'll tell you, I expected that to probably be the winner. And then the fifth is also from Arturia Spark, and it's just a modern sounding. I wanted something modern sounding with a lot more effects, and it's just some kind of electro kit, and I just wanted that as a fair comparison. So let's listen to that minute. It's just a very simple. There's no vocals, no nothing. It's just a very simple early stage thing, just for listening to the drums.
I suppose in a way, any of those could work, right? There's nothing wrong with any of them. But the question that the purpose of the challenge is not to, can you do it? The purpose of the challenge is, what do you learn? What can you learn from the characteristics of each of these approaches, and what really strikes you as the most natural and complementary to the rest of what you're doing? So maybe that's my question to you. What did you find? How did you react when you heard it all in place?
Well, it did surprise me. I mean, I'll tell you that the Emulator 2 was the original, the first drum sound was the original thing that I made when I created this, and it did not end up being, my favorite in this context. But to step back, I think the thing that was very obvious right away is, well, this obviously isn't totally a fair test. To do this, you'd have to kind of do it in every track, because despite the fact that I do want a consistent drum sound, that doesn't mean there's no way I'm going to have the exact same drum sound for every track. That's very not me. So what it taught me was, okay, I need to find a way to unify a few different general drum sounds that are appropriate at different moments. So in this case, for this little groove thing, that's probably going to be, it has a song that goes with, and it's going to be, some new material for me. I really liked the 808 the best. I mean, I thought it sat nicely. It gave the oomph. This is a fun thing. It's going to turn into something, kind of very head shaky. So it's like my tribute to Ed Sheeran. I don't know. But I thought the 808 sounded very modern, and it sounded fun, and it sounded dancey. Greg is confused by my comment.
No, that's all right. He
doesn't think I'm like Ed Sheeran. He's probably right. So I really liked that. But I know that in other settings, in other mixes, I'm going to want drums to sit back far and to not be prominent. And so I think for that purpose...
Isn't it also the case that you don't want to call out directly? So there's a little bit of a danger in just using an 808 or using a 606, because there's so much music that's been done this way that it will now connect you to stylistic referencing these styles and other music that you may not necessarily want to do, because you're trying to create something that's a little more you.
Yeah.
Right? That just complicates you're not going to grab a sample library of these drum machines, I don't think, correct?
No, that's correct. And in fact, the end result of this test is that I bought a modern drum machine. I realized that, that I would need I would need to have some crafted drum sounds that are pre-existing, spend some time prior to really starting the album in earnest on some sound design. And I figured I'd probably need about 3 different sounding drum machines. So what I decided to do was to purchase a modern drum machine that has a lot of sound design capabilities, so that I could do that.
Let me pause, because there's so many drum machines that you could choose from. You could choose virtual instruments as well. Most of those, though, so there's really 2 types, right? You're going to find essentially a sample a sample-based drum setup where people have one way or another crafted sounds in some way or gone to the original equipment and just recorded them, and you now can trigger all of that any way you want, right? The other way would be to essentially synthesize drum sounds from scratch. And that's the I would say less frequent or less popular way to go because it's complicated. It's technically difficult, but you have real control, right? You're not just opening and closing a filter over a sample or something like that, which you really do get to choose the way.
If you're paying attention to Greg's tone of voice, he's foreshadowing. You can probably assume which way I went, which is I went the synth way. I like synths.
Total control.
So that's something I'm really comfortable with and have spent an awful lot of time learning about. And I think that's probably a little different from a lot of people that are very focused on drum machines. A lot of people want to buy a drum machine and hit the pad and have it instantly be this perfect 909 kick sound.
Produced sound with effects.
To me.
Everything.
Yeah. Apparently I don't want to do it the easy way. No, what I want is that control to create something that because as I said, the drums to me are the vibe generator in a way. They are creating so much of the general vibe of the track that you want to have that tight control. You want to create something that's really yours in the drum sounds. And we'll see if I'm successful, but I bought a drum machine called the Tempest it's a weird drum machine. I think they started making it like 12 years ago, and about 4 years ago they stopped making it because I think people had a pretty hard time with it, and I also think it had a weird thing going. It was a collaboration between Roger Lynn and Dave Smith. So between, the father of the modern drum machine, basically, the person who invented the MPC, and Dave Smith, who is one of the most important synth designers, of modern music. So it has this incredible user interface. It's very fun to use, very fun to play. But it also has it's a 6-voice polysynth, right? So it's designed to craft drum sounds, but you can actually just play it like a polysynth. It's really cool Dave Smith Instruments, polysynth. So you get a little bang for your buck that way.
It's the furthest thing from automatic, right?
Yes.
Is that fair? It's absolutely, you don't turn it on and start playing beats. You're going to have to build some things. And for some people, that's just overwhelming. Not for you. You're extremely technical and you certainly,
No, I'm excited about that process. I mean, I'm a little, it's a little daunting in a way because, so many great people over the years have worked so hard on drum sounds, and that's how you get things like the 808, right? That have this magical power to just create the perfect set of sounds. And this brings up an important question I have for you. So you now have this incredible machine. It just arrived from LA, I think. So that makes it extra special. And so are you going to start with, a classic sort of kit sound and try to work from there? Or are you planning to build? And what lessons did you take from the challenge specifically that you're going to try and implement? We haven't done this yet, right? This is new. Yeah.
So
this is where the challenge comes in. And like you said, I haven't actually gone through the process of crafting these sounds yet. It just came yesterday, the drum machine. So we'll see how that goes. But what I learned in the challenge is that, there are a couple of those sounds that are really obvious winners for me. And there are really three of them. And, it's the 606, the 808, and the CR78. So those are the sounds, and there are three.
Thank you, Roland.
Yeah, I love you, Roland. And why don't I just, I don't know, why don't I just make it easy for myself and get those in the Roland cloud or whatever? I don't know, because I like to have things be hard, apparently. Apparently I learned that from you. I learned it by watching you.
But wait, no, you're actually trying to get something different, though, right?
Yes, but what I want to do, I think in my ideal world, in my imagination, I would be able to take the great parts of those sounds and then kind of program something like those that generally has the attributes that make them work so well in a lot of different settings and work in a very particular way, but then use the synth capabilities. So one of the things, for example, the Tempest has is it has a I think it's a 10-slot mod matrix. So you can modulate 10 things in your sound or in your beat with other things in the synth, just like a normal synth. So that's not something a drum machine would typically have, and that's going to allow me, I believe, to create some, so starting with those basic sounds that are 808-ish, let's say. But then let's say you decide to modulate a filter only on the kick drum so that it has a little bit of warble, but not in that normal way that you might warble a kick drum. And it might modulate not the same, it might do it from different sources, right? So, so it might modulate when you hit a particular pad over here only. So when that pad is hit, this is just a stupid example, but those sorts of modulations to me seem like they would be a way to create a drum sound that has those basic attributes that are almost universal at this point. I mean, if you're talking about the 808, but give it a little something, a little something special, which is always what I'm trying to do with sounds for my own music.
And so I'm thinking about there's a newish drum machine. So this is a drum machine they don't make anymore. Like you said, it's about 12 years old. There's a new drum machine by Erica Synths called the LXR2. That is sample-based. However, it does have a mod matrix. It's not nearly as complex and complete as what you have. So why did you choose it? And it's got a lot of modern drum sounds, a lot of interesting things about it. It's sample-based, but there's a lot of things you can do with those samples. Why did you choose to go the pure synth route versus something that's a hybrid, maybe?
Well, just to be clear, this one is actually a hybrid. It's 4 voices per part, or 4 oscillators per voice. I'm sorry. So 2 of those oscillators are true analog oscillators, and then there are 2 oscillators that are digital, and it's not wavetable. Anyway, they have samples that you can use in those 2 digital oscillators.
PCM samples.
Yeah. So
sort of.
Yeah,
Okay.
sort of. So basically, you can combine any or all of the above. So you can't. People bitched a lot about this drum machine because you can't load your own samples into it, but that was not the point. Like that's they gave you these samples. And there's a wide variety of samples, both drum samples, percussion samples, and synth samples, actually. They gave them to you to bolster this. This is a synth. I mean, that's what it is. The samples are there to aid in your sound design process, not to create a drum sound from a sample. So I would say it's a very different approach, but still does.
That is literally the opposite.
Samples.
Yeah, that's the opposite of that LXR2. The LXR2 assumes the sample is your starting point, and you do things with it and add extra transient pop or crack or whatever you want to. Yeah, this is the opposite of that. I see. I didn't realize that. Okay, excellent. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a really interesting design, and obviously created by 2 people who are giants of that world. So, it's one of those machines that I think has a very limited user base, just by nature of how it's designed. But if you love it, I mean, people who love it really love it, and people who don't love it really get rid of it super fast.
And so how is this going to affect the actual drum programming you do, or will it at all, do you think?
That's interesting.
So I'm talking about the notes,
Yeah,
the rhythms
actual rhythms. Yeah. I think this will encourage me to be more, to bring more of myself into those rather than, when you're working in a DAW, a lot of times whatever drum instrument you're working with will have, some loops that you can use. And I think it's a pretty common practice for people when they're sketching something to pull in, a drum loop, just to get something going at the beginning of the process. Right. So, you're working with this virtual instrument, you've got a loop going. But the problem is, and I think you mentioned this in the last episode, once you start hearing something a certain way, it's very difficult to stop hearing it that way. And so if you pull in, a certain type of drum loop just as a starter, it's really hard once you've been sitting for hours and hours with that drum loop playing in the background as you've crafted other parts. It's really hard to go back and change it to something significantly different. Like you can't imagine that anymore. At least I can't. And I think there's a pretty common production problem for people who produce drums, in the box that way. So what I'm hoping And again, I've only had one session with this thing, but I'm hoping it allows me to bring a little bit more of my own self into the actual rhythms and notes. I'm by no means a drummer, and I'm not going to be playing a full drum beat with all 10 fingers on the pads. That's just I don't work that way. But I think designing those beats more from the ground up without that input from the outside, I'm hoping allows me to do something that's a little bit more me.
Wow. This really is it's interesting. It's the complementary challenge to the previous episode, which is to say you're trying to put me in a position to stop my over-analytical constructive thinking and just make some damn music. And here, in your case, we're saying, slow down, stop, quit just throwing every bit of candy you find in the candy shelf into your bag. Stop and really focus on, let's get that particular candy just right and make it what you want it and need it to be. It's interesting. I've never seen you focus that intensely on a particular aspect of what you're doing. I don't think. Maybe the song itself and the lyrics, that's different. But when you're in your production process, this is a new thing for you. It's good. Very good, I think. It'll be interesting.
It is. Yeah, and I'm hoping, I actually also, part of the way this new material has started to develop is I, instead of, normally I use a normal DAW, like a tape machine style DAW, like Cubase is the main one I use now, and record that way. But what I did about a year ago as I started, I was writing a lot of these songs and was starting to think about how to record them and play around with that, is I bought Ableton so that I could, because I tend to wander in my playing, and I wanted to try to bring a little bit more tightness into everything. This is hence, the focus on the drums too. So I wanted to, a lot of the music that I admire the most, that I would say is closest to what I do, has a tightness to it, despite its, sort of strange sound sets that it may be using or whatever. So I wanted to see if I could just, challenge myself to see if I could incorporate that a bit more into my own music. And Ableton, for me is very difficult because it doesn't allow me that freedom to just wander through an improvisation for 10 minutes.
For listeners' benefit here, Ableton, so as she was saying, her Cubase DAW is more of a tape machine. You press record and go. Ableton is really designed to be grid-based, to look at pieces of music in chunks and let them loop and repeat in various combinations. So it's sort of forcing you into, not forcing you, but it's a different way of approaching patterns and such. Yeah, is that fair?
Yeah, because it works in chunks. You essentially build up sections of music by piecing those chunks together. That's the natural way to use Ableton. That's how people, and that's why most people, that's how they naturally make music in the first place. So it works for them straight out of the gate. For me, it's a way to sort of compress what I do into more manageable chunks than what I would naturally create. And so it's limiting me in a way that I think is healthy for me. And it's been interesting for sure. It's been a very different process.
What I actually expect, this is what I think will happen. I'm going to make a prediction right here on live, not TV. And it is this. I think that ultimately the percussion that you create, and we're going to move on to, and we'll see this in the next episode, I hope, maybe soon. We'll have a follow-up here. But ultimately, I think your drums, your percussion tracks will become more integrated. They'll become less noticeable in a way because they will be much more integrated in part of the I don't want to say pastiche, but the more collage-like nature of your music that you produce. The drums will just fade into that in a natural way, as opposed to being this thing that's sticking outside and that's sort of always not combating, but anyway, that's clearly outside of it. I think the prediction is that it will become more integrated, and so we won't notice so much. It will just, more of it will feel like your natural chaos in a way, which is good.
I hope that's true. That's a really good encapsulation of what I would like to happen. So yeah,
good. That's what I think That's what I predict.
Yeah.
And it won't feel calculated. If you do it well, I won't let you do it if it's, I'll help you not make it feel calculated, because that's not so great. It doesn't fit what you do. It needs to, and that's one of the most important and good things about your new music, I think, is that it feels extremely, it's not just off the cuff, but it feels that way. It feels very instantly of the moment, evocative, emotive, has a freshness to it that way that feels, anyway, very good and playful and fun. Anyway, I expect that as calculated as all this drum talk is, that and the approach that you're taking, I think and hope that it will feel natural in the same way that your music does. So
Me too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about all we wanted to cover today. Is there anything else you want to
and
tell
we're going to follow
our-
up with
our
this. We're going
viewing
to hear more. We're going to hear more as you as you produce. We're going to hear more. So
Yeah, and
we'll come
we'd love
back
to hear-
and see what we did.
We'd love to hear from any listeners on, things that you would like us to talk about. Things
Would we,
you'd
though?
like to hear.
Oh yeah,
Well-
we would. Yeah, we would. Okay. No,
Aren't
all
we
right.
supposed to say that?
The sponsors may pull out if we do that too much,
It's a good point.
depends.
They are
But,
our lifeblood.
I know they're essential. We have to make sure everything goes through them. That's the key.
Yeah.
They will have a say in
Yeah,
what we decide to
is.
cover. But anyway, yes, sure, absolutely. We welcome topic ideas. Yeah, if we know about them, we'll talk about them. If we don't know about them, we'll talk about them.
Yeah,
count on it.
that's what you do on a podcast, right? You just
Yeah,
Talk about
it's a
anything.
podcast, after all.
all right.
Okay.
Excellent. We will be back with you for episode 5 very soon. And until then, hope you all enjoy making music. And
Be well. Don't make too
Yeah.
much.
but don't
All
make too
right.
little.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Till
bye,
soon.
everyone.
Bye-bye.